Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I am Matt Connarton, and the Honorable Gary S. Hopper is not with us again this week. He's still recuperating and dealing with what's been going on with him. So hopefully we'll have him back relatively soon. I miss Gary when he's not here, but we shall soldier on. We do have a great guest with us today, returning to the show for we're kind of talking off air. It's been probably at least a year, but we have Dave Fine with us. So. Dave, welcome back.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Good to see you. And let's jump right into it. We were talking off air about something that I've started hearing about a lot, and you say it's become a real problem here in New Hampshire, is the heroin, the heroin addiction, and this is something that in New Hampshire. I mean, I'm used to hearing about meth and things like that, but the heroin thing is I guess is really spiraled out of control. So we can talk about that, and we'll see what else we get to too. But give us, for the viewers who are not familiar with you, give us a little bit of your background, where you're from, and what you do, and all that.
Well, my background is that first of all, I'm a person in recovery myself.
Okay.
And I've been clean and sober for 36 years.
Wow, good for you.
And as a result of that, I have worked in the human services field pretty much my whole life, with a short diversion for about 8 years into the corporate world and then right back into it.
Yeah.
I currently work for a Florida treatment center called Insight to Recovery.
Yeah.
And Insight to Recovery is a treatment center that has an inpatient and outpatient program. And I'm their New England coordinator. So my job is really to get involved with agencies and people in New England, and if they have somebody that needs treatment for heroin addiction or any other addiction, to sort of send them down that way.
Are they all over the country, by the way, that organization?
That organization is a single organization, so it's just one treatment center.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but you mentioned you're their New England coordinator.
So
do they have folks all over the country?
Yeah, we market all over the country.
Okay.
So people come. Actually, South Florida has become the kind of mecca of recovery programs.
Really?
And most people don't know that.
Yeah.
But probably within 3 counties, Dade County, Broward County, and Palm Beach County, there's probably about 30 to 50 treatment centers, halfway houses. So there's a recovering community down there. When people go, people oftentimes need to get out of the environment that they're in to get clean and sober. So that's one of the good reasons to get somebody from New England into Florida for treatment, because they can change their playgrounds and playmates and the environment in which they're using. So it's a great place to be, because there's so many other people in sobriety and recovery in South Florida.
Sure.
So it's a good place to be. And then also, for the past 20 years, I've published a newspaper for people in recovery in those 3 counties, and also have a website, thesolutionnews.com, which is obviously an international website, and it deals with recovery subjects.
Okay.
So basically, that's my background. Oh, also, I'm a recovery coach. And a recovery coach trainer. So it's just a bunch of things all kind of put together.
Sure.
Bottom line is, it's about helping alcoholics and drug addicts get better, get sober and clean.
By the way, the newspaper, how often is that published?
I publish quarterly.
Quarterly, okay.
And it's a pretty much of an old concept. I give the paper away.
Sure.
And I sell advertising in the paper. So that's been good to me over the years, and it keeps me out of trouble, and it allows me to write and do the things that I enjoy the most. So it's I think life's good when you love your work, and I love mine. So
you mentioned you've been in recovery for 36 years. Do you mind telling us what it was that you were hooked on, or?
Pretty much everything except what we're going to talk about tonight.
Okay.
I'm the old hippie generation. So my generation was like, I'm 68 years old, so I went through the 50s. You know, alcohol was pretty big when I was in high school. By the time I got to college, we had moved into marijuana and then other drugs.
Sure.
So that what really took me down the most was a combination of anything and everything at that point
Yeah.
of my life. And so my addiction was alcohol and drugs.
Okay.
So I'm both an alcoholic and a drug addict in recovery. So my sympathy, my empathy for addiction is very, very strong over the years, and I've managed to, have the opportunity to work with people both as a job and also outside of work.
Yeah.
So it's been a really nice ride, a nice 36 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Good.
the good thing, one of the things that's happening now in this whole field of recovery is that people are being encouraged to speak up about the fact that they're in recovery.
Okay.
It's been kind of underground for a long, long time for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And there's recently been a film put out, and the film is about advocacy.
Okay.
And we're talking more about advocating because most causes like breast cancer awareness, epilepsy, heart disease, they have spokesmen. People talk and they talk about it, and it's very public. And alcoholism and addiction is a disease, and it's probably a disease that affects more people than cancer and heart disease combined. And
Which is remarkable. I remember you mentioned that too the last time you were here, and
Yeah.
I was very surprised by that.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
Very surprised.
Yep, and it's and it affect. I was thinking about that while I was outside waiting for the show to start. How pervasive this is, and how people really don't realize it.
Yeah.
You go about your day-to-day life, and you don't think about it. But I was just standing outside the door, and there's a sign in this facility in your studio that talks about how there's a zero tolerance policy for alcohol and drugs in this facility and on this workplace.
Right.
And that's just there. And it's
Right.
like I'm sure people walk by it 100 times, and the impact of that really doesn't occur to them of why that is, what that's there for, how much drug addiction and alcoholism affect productivity on the workplace. I mean, this is just one small facet of how it affects the courts, how it affects our penal system, correctional facilities, fire, police, all the public services, school teachers that are dealing with this in high school, and the alarming rate of high school students becoming addicted to drugs and showing up in class. And so it's all over the place. And one of the things, it's like I was pulling some papers together, and one of the things that I found was I'm going to talk a little bit about a group of friends of mine that have an agency that does advocacy, and it's called New Futures, and they're in Concord.
Okay.
And I'll give a number for New Futures, and also tell you a little bit more about something that New Futures is doing in Manchester tomorrow night. But they publish it's for the impact of how pervasive this is. They publish headlines and then articles that are that have to do with drug addiction and alcoholism in local papers. And just quickly, this is just February 1st through February, let's say the 10th. Police arrest 4 on heroin charges in Ringe. Hampton man faces drug charges in Mass. Nashua man crashes into home, DWI. Merrimack woman drives drunk with 2 children. Felony drug arrest in Hollis. Boscawen drug dealer robbed at gunpoint. Don't shop where they sell spice. That's a chemical that you can get at your local variety store these days. That's extremely dangerous drug.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Fight outside Martha's in Nashua. Lincoln residents facing drug charges in Manchester. EMT accused of stealing drugs. UNH near top in nation for alcohol drug arrests.
Really?
Auburn men charged for heroin possession. 6 from New Hampshire arrested on heroin raid. Laconia man dies from Belmont man's heroin.
Wow.
And New Hampshire authorities eye attack on heroin. A deadly mix of heroin seen in New Hampshire and elsewhere. And that's just, 7 or 8 days of headlines
Wow.
from local newspapers.
I was going to ask you what the time frame was
Yeah,
for
it
all
was from
those.
February 1st to February 7th.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so, that's
surprised.
we don't see, you
Yeah.
don't look at it that way. You see a headline, and what's even more alarming about these articles is that if you go into now that newspapers are all online,
Mm-hmm.
if you go into most papers, like if you go into the Manchester Union Leader and they run the story, and the story is about a woman that leaves 2 kids in her car while
Sure.
she's loaded sitting in the bar room.
Yeah.
And so then, after the articles now, it's very common, it's comments.
Oh,
So-
yeah. Oh, yeah. You see that online.
Right.
The people make all kinds of. Some of it, unfortunately, is really ignorant. A lot of the things that people say because they
Right.
have anonymity and they
Exactly.
can
They can say
mouth
whatever
off
they
and-
want.
Right. Right.
But when you read that, that can be really pretty scary to think that the stigma of alcoholism and drug addiction is still so strong
Mm-hmm.
that people really have it on a moral issue, believe that something somewhat evil and
Right.
and dark about it that somebody would really have control over, when in fact we know it's a disease, and it's as much of a disease as cancer or heart disease.
Yeah.
So that's just but my point more is about the fact that that the problem is just so pervasive that most people just don't even hardly notice it in their
Sure.
day-to-day life. But the other side of that coin is I don't think I know one person, when they find out that I'm a person in recovery, that doesn't tell me about Uncle Harry or their nephew or their next door neighbor or somebody in their life that they know that's dealing and struggling with addiction.
Sure.
So it's extremely pervasive, and that's the bad news. But the good news is that obviously there is a solution to that.
Yeah.
And the solution is, most people believe that the solution is abstinence, and finding that abstinence through one of many programs that are available for people that want to get better.
Sure.
So, and that solution's out there, and there are now lots of people standing up and talking about their recovery.
Why do you think that is? Why the shift now? Why, because it sounds like the stigma's kind of eased a little bit, so people are feel more free to discuss it and treat it like the disease that it is.
I think that's it, and I think that we were sort of just on it a little bit. Is that people know somebody? It's
Sure.
like it's kind of out of the closet in the fact that people know somebody that's got the problem, and for for me, dealing with people that suffer from addiction is where a lot of the energy goes. Where the people that are really suffer from addiction oftentimes are the family members of the person.
Right.
And the reason that is because it's like an alien. It's like going to an alien planet when you live a normal lifestyle, and all of a sudden you're dealing with somebody with an addiction that's behaving in ways that are just unimaginable to you. It's very it brings a lot of, if you're the parents, the fear of is my child going to live or die? Husbands and wives that have to live with not knowing what's going to walk through the door.
It must be terrible.
And
it must be terrible. Yeah.
And these are the kind of things where, I believe a lot of attention the more that we can talk about this, the more that this is out in the open, and that those folks realize that they're not alone with this, that there's a
Sure.
lot of people that are dealing with that, and there are programs, very good programs for family members of people in recovery. Al-Anon is one.
Well, I was going to say too, with Al-Anon, I've always heard they encourage family members and spouses or parents or whomever or children to go with the person who's suffering from the addiction, so that they can also, because they need,
need
as you
help.
indicated, they need help as well,
Right.
because it affects them.
What we say is it's a family disease,
Sure.
and it doesn't matter. And one of the things that's very interesting to me is that when you go to treatment and when you talk about when you get the family involved, do you realize that we say that an alcoholic or an addict in their active addiction impacts about 20 people. Now, it'd be probably family members, maybe friends that care about them and are watching them go down the tubes.
Coworkers,
and but the nice part about that, again, the good part is that you flip that coin over, and then when that person becomes somebody who's a person in recovery, that effect is a ripple effect the other way, and that's somebody that says, okay, now, the family's getting back together. The kids are being raised by a sober dad or mom. And mom and dad are happy because, their son or daughter are doing well. And so that effect, again, from the negative turns to an effect in the positive. And that's always really wonderful to watch when this is what you do, when you work in this field and you see. The way we say it is you see the light come on in people's eyes and you see them realize that there's another way of life besides the life they're living.
Sure.
And I think that's why those of us that do this work do it. It's just it's such a rewarding thing. There's no value you can place on that.
Sounds it. Yeah, absolutely.
I was reading about the arrests and so forth. Another thing, I was just going through quickly today to pull some stuff together.
Sure.
One of these articles, Manchester chief says heroin won't be going away, and this is after one of the big drug busts. They've had a couple in the last month or so, and one just very recently, but this is before that one. And he essentially just says, that they can keep. It's a short-term solution. You're arresting these people, you're getting this amount of drugs off the street, but they just keep coming. And so, it's really a three-pronged attack that we need to do when it comes to the drug problems in America. We have to have prevention. The prevention is something that the federal government is, since Obama's become president, has become much more involved in the prevention area. So you have prevention. You have advocacy, which is important to get the word out to destigmatize the disease.
Sure.
And you have treatment, and the treatment aspect of it is that we have to have places for people to go that decide that they're ready to get help.
Right. The resources have to be there.
And frankly, the state is probably as bad as it gets in the country in that regard.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that's unfortunate, but that's changing also. And what you just mentioned about the change in sort of the stigma, as that changes, that the other piece of that is that then people's attitudes that are legislators and that work in the Bureau of Drug and Alcohol Services and so forth are starting to become more aware of the fact that we need to do more in that area. So good things are happening. One thing that's happened recently is that this Medicaid expansion, which is not completely passed yet, but it passed the House, and I think it's pretty clearly going to pass the Senate.
Sure.
And what that is that it will expand services for about 7,000 people that are suffering from substance abuse. And that's pretty good.
Yeah, and can you touch on, too, you mentioned the prevention aspect, how the Obama administration has affected that, and I don't know any of the details on what their involvement has been in that, so can you talk about that a little bit, too?
Well, it's just, I really can't say an awful lot about that in that regard, except to say that we've gone back and forth sort of from a federal understanding of from Just Say No, Nancy Reagan, to the war on drugs, which is like another one that we lost, unfortunately, or that we have lost so far. At least that's my opinion.
Oh, I completely agree.
And then we've come around to like you know, I guess we, you know, if Gary was here, we could have a really great time on this. 'Cause he and I never agree on much, but
Yeah.
that's why I love the guy.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like, do you pour money on the problem to make it better and go away? That's one thing that's been tried, you know,
For decades and decades.
yeah.
Yep.
And then it's the just say no. It's just say no enough, and that's really prevention. Just say no.
Yeah.
So I think what they've tried to do is put more energy into public awareness, conferences, things of that nature at the federal level, just through the Department of Health, Education and Welfare and so forth, just to get the awareness going down through the ranks.
Right.
For the last probably 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot of emphasis on treatment, fortunately.
Yeah.
But treatments can be very expensive. So one of the things that is happening as a trend in the treatment field is this education prevention model, and also the idea being that you want to. It's like when you fix a car. You know, you don't, if something's wrong with the car, you don't tear the engine out of the car.
Right.
You don't go to the worst case scenario first. You start with the least intrusive, simplest form of dealing with the problem. And
Right.
that's kind of where I believe, and again, you know, we could have a panel of people here that don't really know what Obamacare is about.
Sure.
So we don't really know this. So for me, I'm just really talking off the top of my head about it. But at one point, I was.
Oh, Dave, I'm sorry. Can you hold that thought? We have a call.
Oh, good.
Oh, it's Gary.
Oh.
Gary, welcome.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
We're talking about politics. I was.
How are you
Well,
doing?
as soon as I heard you love me, then I knew I had to worry, because that's, you know,
Oh, I did
there's
say
usually
that.
something going to follow that.
I did say that out loud in front of a camera. I gotta be careful with that stuff.
That's right. There's no taking it back now. And once it's on the internet, it's there forever.
Yeah, I know it. I'll be going to a different kind of meeting.
How are you doing, Gary? It's good to hear your voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you doing? You hanging in there?
Oh, like crap.
Are ya?
Like crap. I'm going through, as some people may know, is treatment for, it's actually a pre-skin cancer.
Yeah.
But they're frying the ever-loving crap out of my neck, and it's so freaking open and so sore that it's really, really unpleasant.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful to you and Dave for being there and doing the show.
Oh,
And it is
absolutely.
a great show. But I got really one question for Dave, and this is one of the things as a Republican I struggle with. Not that there's exclusively one thing, but
Yeah.
one thing in particular is a few years ago on the House floor we were deciding to cut money for a program, doesn't really matter which one, and one of the arguments for cutting it was that there was no clear barometer that the money being spent was actually helpful. In other words, there is no good. Is there a good way, or can we come up with a good way to say program A, B, and C works, and we know that it's got a 20% success rate, 80%, whatever it is, so that you're not just spending money for the sake of spending money.
Some sort of metrics or something to.
Right.
Yeah, some way to gauge how well a program is working, so the taxpayers are getting what they pay for.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to take my answer off the air. Thank you very much, guys.
All right, Gary.
Thanks, Gary. Feel better.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. One of the things is it's very difficult to measure quantitatively the effectiveness of programs that have to do with human behavior and things that are kind of intangible to a certain degree.
Sure.
What we would say is, let's say that the program was, okay, we want people to go to this program, get sober, and stay sober.
Right.
That's our objective. So let's the state's going to put this much money into that program, but we want, obviously, like something that's more tangible, you want to be able to measure the results. And the difficulty there is it's a monitoring problem. And it's a monitoring problem that, and it's a good thing to, I like the way Gary asked the question, because it doesn't just work for, the problem does not just exist for the government putting money into programs. The problem exists for treatment centers and programs. Alcoholics Anonymous does not have a solid handle on a percentage that they can say is a number of people that get sober that go to AA.
So I would think the inherent challenge is, unless everyone is going to somehow keep in touch with you, with the organization, then you really have no way of knowing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that the problem is how do you follow people? How do you now if you had a state agency and you had a bureaucracy, you could have somebody whose job was nothing else than to follow up and monitor people that had gone through this program. This is a 3-month program, and somebody would say, okay, we're gonna, but again, the monitoring would have to be pretty severe. I mean, you can't take somebody's word for the fact that they're clean and sober.
That's true.
Unfortunately. But it would be nice if everybody was honest all the time. But that's not the case. So how do you find out whether somebody's clean and sober in treatment? Is you do a urinalysis, and it would have to be the same kind of thing, and then you could quantify it, but it would be quite costly to do that. You'd be putting a lot of money there. So Gary's question, Gary's been really a good guy to know for me, because I've been his guest on several occasions at the State House for a couple different hearings.
Yeah.
And the money guys, and the people in charge of the finance, they want to know when they're spending our money. They want to know
absolutely.
Where it's going, what the results are, and I was totally impressed. It made me really do a lot of thinking when I went to a hearing on drug courts, and drug courts are very, very have been very successful according to the records that they keep on drug courts. And again, this is a way of how they quantify it.
Right.
And that was the question of the man who was the finance guy. And he said, we're told. He was an older gentleman. And he's probably been in the State House for 35 years.
Sure.
And he said, how many times have I sat here and listened to people come in and tell me how much money we're going to save by doing this, but I've never seen the money.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like, and that's unfortunate, but true. I mean, I'm glad that I'm on this side of it, and I don't have to be on Gary's side up there making kind of decisions around these things, because it's so difficult.
Right.
I don't think that, one of the things an organization like New Futures has some very, very good numbers on. There's if you spend $1, what you're getting back in terms of society's benefit in dollars.
Yeah.
There are people doing all those kind of statistical analysis, but there's no doubt that for somebody to get treatment, and assuming that they stay clean and sober after that treatment, compared to somebody that gets arrested and goes into the system, you're saving a lot of money,
right?
And these are the kind of things that are coming out in the film. That the name of the film is The Anonymous People, and it's being shown around if people are interested in seeing it. But it's about the best documentary on substance abuse that's ever been. It's really an excellent film.
I need to ask you, Dave, because you mentioned the drug courts and you mentioned people getting arrested and going into the system. I mean, is that a huge, because certainly from my vantage point, it seems to me like a huge part of the problem here, and it probably contributes to the stigma quite a bit too, is that we treat addicts to a large extent like criminals. And that's just completely the wrong way to do it. I mean, and also too for practical, I mean, our prisons are overcrowded. We constantly hear about that, but it's full of 50% of them are drug offenders. Some of them low-level drug offenders. I mean, is that a huge part of the problem here?
I think so, and one of the things that I for the longest time, the number that people use is that 85% of the people that are in prison in the country are drug and alcohol related crimes, one way or another.
Right.
Not necessarily they're arrested for drugs or alcohol, but they were drunk or high when they committed the crime that they did, or they committed the crime so that they could be drunk or high.
Sure.
Which is one of the things with heroin that we talk about. So, and if 85% of the people are in there because of drugs and alcohol, then you got that's an amazing thing. Years ago, I had an opportunity to take. I worked at a place in Nashua, I believe, still there. I mean, this is many years ago, called the Adult Learning Center in Nashua, and we had an alternative high school for kids that had dropped out and now returned to get their GED. And it was an excellent program. And we took them, it was back when Scared Straight was a pretty common phenomenon, and that's when you'd take young kids into the prison, and the prisoners would scare them. And we would call that aversive therapy.
Yes.
Aversive therapy.
Does that still go on? Do they still do that stuff?
Well, I've seen. I think there's even a TV show now, a reality.
Oh, is there?
Show
Oh, it figures. Yeah, I would think it'd be pretty effective.
Yeah, it's extreme scared straight now because everything's extreme.
Right.
Like extreme water drinking.
That's how you market it to the kids.
Right, exactly. But and so we took these kids up there, and it was pretty effective in terms of getting them to take a look at what their future would be. And Concord Prison's not pretty.
Right.
And I remember one of the things that they did is they took us in a very small room, and they had the life guys that were never going to get out of there.
Sure.
And one of them was a guy that had murdered several people in very bizarre, cruel murder. And somebody asked him if he was high when he did it, and I'll never forget the look that he gave. I thought he was gonna. I think I asked him the question.
Yeah.
And I thought I was gonna be his next victim.
Yeah.
Because that was really his story. That he was on. It was like almost a flashback. He was a veteran. He was on LSD, and he just lost it.
Yeah.
And it's very rare kind of thing for that to be that extreme, but he kind of felt that was the reason. And that's just an extreme kind of story. But But definitely, prisons are full of people. By treating people as criminals, you take a low level. Somebody that's got an ounce of marijuana and gets arrested and finds himself at the county jail or the prison, God help them if that's the case.
Yeah.
I mean, you're taking somebody that basically is, just a regular person with a small habit,
right,
a bad habit and an illegal habit, but a habit, an addiction, and the next thing you know, you might be creating the next person that's going to be a lifer in prisons. It's just a bad road to go down.
Because that's what prison teaches people anyway. Generally, is how to be hardened criminals.
And it depends. Some of these places are not that easy to get in with self-help groups and stuff like that to bring the message into to them. There are fortunately places in Valley Street and the county jail that has meetings and brought in from the outside, but. It's good. So to get back, another thing I'd like to this heroin thing. What's happened?
Yeah.
What's happened is heroin. When I was a young man, you asked me about my own personal drug experience.
Yeah.
I saw a movie on, I saw something on television, and it was one of those, it was like a drama at Playhouse 90 or some show of that. Somebody, it kind of dates me, but it was an acted out drama that they did on television about, it was called Panic in Needle Park.
Okay.
And it was about heroin addiction in Greenwich Village in New York in the 50s. And back in the day when a junkie was somebody that was creeping around in the alleyway shooting up dope, and it was a scary. I remember seeing it. I was not even I wasn't a teenager. I was younger than that, and it had made such an impression on me that even in the worst of throes of my addiction, and it was for me very, very bad for a period of about 7 or 8 years. With everything that was out there and doing virtually everything that was out there, there was a line drawn for me in the sand that I would not ever shoot drugs or put a needle in my arm, and I never did. But what's happened is that through the abuse of prescription drugs, and in particular a drug called OxyContin, which is a pain medication.
We've heard a lot about that over the past decade plus,
And fentanyl, Vicodins, Percocets, codeine-based Tylenol 3s, anything that has opiate content. The abuse of those drugs has become epidemic in the United States through, number one, it's like young people are using them. And number two are people that are older that have had some pain problems.
Sure.
That start taking those pills, and the next thing you know, they're hooked and addicted on the pain medication and abusing it.
That can happen pretty easily, I'm sure, in that instance.
Fairly easily, and not very well monitored by the medical profession, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And also, it's unfortunate that I think that the drug companies have been so free to. It's almost, to me, it's almost cynical to manufacture, all these pain medications, and all you have to do is, we're talking about doing math and quantifying things. If you add up how many OxyContins have been out there, just about every American would have to be in chronic pain for them, and the drug companies know that. So it's like, it's actually they've even come up with a drug that's used for opium addiction treatment. So it's like they've got people coming and going.
Well, that's like the methadone, the methadone clinics.
Methadone has been used for years and years, and for methadone and Suboxone, some of the newer drugs that are being used. There's controversy in the field of recovery around the use of these things. However, I don't think there can be any disagreement that methadone is an effective drug to keep people off of heroin.
Yeah. So you advocate for that, because I hear some criticism of it, that you're just replacing one thing with another. But
a lot of times for me, I feel that there's a theory now, and I guess it's about keeping an open mind about a lot of things.
Sure.
I don't think I'm really in a position to tell people how to do this.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that they're at least going in the right direction.
Okay. No, it makes sense.
That's a better way of saying it, for me to say that I advocate. I believe I know people that are, that it's called medically assisted, recovery.
Sure.
And there are lots of people in doing it that way now. So it's there's something in the field of addiction now called harm reduction, and harm reduction goes something like this: if say you're a methamphetamine addict and you drink. Well, the old school is you got to give up everything. You don't drink, you don't do meth, you don't. You just stop. You're abstinent.
Yeah.
Harm reduction says the methamphetamine's killing you faster than the alcohol. So if we can get you off the methamphetamine and you're still drinking, we'll talk about drinking later. Let's get you off the methamphetamine.
But for now, it's a good trade.
Yeah, right. Whatever. It's a step in the right direction.
Okay.
So that's something that's become more and more. You hear more about this.
I was going to say, I just started hearing about this recently, so this is a relatively new concept, right? This way of approaching it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it, for somebody that's schooled in, abstinence-based recovery, it's a mind blower.
Sure.
But I've had the opportunity to work in a program that practices harm reduction. And once I was open my mind to seeing the difference, it's like I don't want Joe to die.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my goal here.
Right.
Now, if he's smoking pot and shooting heroin, am I going to say it's all or nothing, and he's going to say screw that and walk down the road and continue to do both? Wouldn't it be better if I could convince him or allow him to convince himself that probably this is a better way to go?
Yeah.
And then let him make the same decision, because it always effectively boils down to the person
Right.
making the decision, not somebody telling them what to do or how to do it.
Is there a lot of pushback on this kind of relatively new approach?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, because it's a pushback because programs. Alcoholics Anonymous is the oldest, most effective, without a doubt.
Sure.
I mean, we don't have to do quantification of that. It's pretty well known.
Yeah.
Program for the treatment of alcoholism, and there is no doubt that it works. And the primary core belief in Alcoholics Anonymous is abstinence. You don't drink no matter what.
Right. Right.
And so, that's the rock solid standard in recovery. And so, to say to somebody that's brought up in that tradition,
Yeah.
this guy's smoking pot. Well, in AA, they would say you're not sober if you're smoking pot.
Yeah.
So the pushback comes there.
Yeah.
The pushback comes in professionally also. I mean, the clinicians that have been trained in abstinence-based, they're a little bit slower to open their mind up to say, well, maybe there's another way here. It's sort of leading edge at this point in time. I won't say that that court's out on this, because it's being used in a lot of places, then used very effectively in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And if it's saving lives and allowing people to change their life, who am I to say? It's again like another aspect of this is there's Christian-based treatment. And Christian-based treatment, people don't typically go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. They typically go to church.
Right.
They believe that Jesus cures you of your ills and sickness.
Yeah.
And so if you go to a faith-based program, you can get clean and sober at a faith-based program, and that's perfectly. My feeling is that any time an alcoholic or an addict doesn't drink or do drugs, I don't care how they get there.
Right. Whatever
I
works.
could care less how they find sobriety and recovery.
You mentioned the faith-based. I'm reminded of Alice Cooper. I'm sure you know his story,
Yeah.
and I guess he just prayed.
Yeah.
He finally got to a point where he said a prayer.
Yeah.
Please help me with this. And when he woke up, that was it.
Yep.
Like just gone. No more addiction.
Right.
His only addiction now is Diet Coke.
I think he plays golf too.
Well, true, yeah, yeah. But he has no. But I've heard him talk about it in interviews, and from that moment,
Yep.
it was that quick, and he has no. He's not even tempted. He doesn't even think about it.
Right.
It's just nothing. Just no interest in drinking.
Well, we have a ex-president that had the same experience,
Yeah.
Mr. Bush.
Right, right.
So
That's true. I'd forgotten about
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah.
Although he's never quite. I feel like he kind of would step right up to the line, but he would never quite admit to being an alcoholic.
Right.
He admitted that he drank, but when he turned 40, he decided it was time to grow up and stop.
Stop.
But yeah, it is
Yeah.
basically the same story.
Right.
He prayed, he
Okay.
gave himself to the Lord, and that was it.
That was it. Yep. And that's fine. For me, it's like, hallelujah, I'm fine with that.
Absolutely.
It's just this is a killer. So what's happened is that the manufacturer of the medication really has led a lot of people that normally would not get involved in heroin to get involved in heroin. The reason is that OxyContin is such a powerful and potent drug that when I was in Florida, I lived in Florida for 22 years, people were holding up pharmacies and they weren't taking the cash; they were just taking the bills.
No kidding.
That's it.
Interesting.
And that's how powerful that it is. And what's happened is that the price, because there's more attention to OxyContins now, so the controls are a lot stronger in terms of getting them. So they're harder to get if you're addicted to them.
Sure.
And also the price has gone crazy.
Has
it's
it?
like,
Yeah.
well, I was just reading today, it's like about $1 a milligram, and these pills are typically 30 or 80 milligrams.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you get an 80 milligram pill for $80, that's a lot of money. You
Yeah.
can get a bag of heroin, they say now in the article I just read, for $5 to $10, depending on quantity and quality and so forth. But
Yeah.
so that people that need the opiate are sticking needles in their arm, and also that the heroin now is a lot easier to ingest through snorting it or smoking it.
Oh, really?
So lots of people are getting into it that way.
Okay.
So what's happened is apparently there's a very bad heroin going around in New England,
Okay.
and people are dying. The deaths from overdoses in New Hampshire went from 14 in 2010 to 45 last year.
No kidding.
And those are overdoses due directly to heroin.
Was last year when the first big spike was detected? Because it seems like it's only been within the last year that I've started hearing about heroin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Are we hearing about that more now than meth? Because it seems like meth, particularly up north, I mean, you'd know better than me, but
Well,
I used to hear about meth all the time before I
Right.
started hearing about heroin all the
Right.
time, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think it's replaced meth in terms of being the most dangerous drug right now that's out there. I mean, methamphetamines, in terms of its usage,
Yeah.
methamphetamine is certainly a dangerous drug. It's a very evil drug, but
Yeah.
yeah. So one of the things that and this I would like to do probably a whole show on this, maybe next week if I can get my friend as a guest. She has an organization for families, but there is a drug called Narcan, and
Heard of it.
and it is it's like an EpiPen, and when people are in a drug overdose, their respiratory system shuts down.
Yeah.
And this drug, when it's administered, takes somebody that, for all intents and purposes, is dead, and the next thing you know, they're sitting up and talking to you. And they're using it in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Vermont, and first responders are trained to use it, and police are carrying it, and it's saving lives. It's saved, like I was reading in Quincy, Mass, they were talking about 254 times they've needed to use this. And so one of the things that's going to go up before the Senate and State House is the use of this for first responders, getting police trained and having this with them. And again, this opens up an area of controversy because are we somehow subtly condoning the use because so it's a tricky issue for people that are very, very conservative to get their heads around.
Yeah, well, plus again that component too of treating drug addicts like criminals. I mean, unless we've got to get away from that. And this is another reason why.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so that's a pretty strong issue these days, and I think it's an area where we can really make a difference in terms of saving some lives, because it's just tragic, and not in my experience and in my recovery, the past year, certainly a month doesn't go by that I don't know of somebody that's in the circle of recovery that I'm in that's overdosed and died.
Really?
And it's like we say, you're stepping over the bodies, really. It's that serious.
Wow. Wow, Dave, we're almost out of
Good.
time. I want to, and
Yeah.
I know you'll be with us next week too, which is great. But resources people need to know about online and whatnot. What do we need to know as far as websites and all that?
Well, for me, if you want to go to my website, you can go to thesolutionnews.com.
Okay.
My phone number, actually, if you need any referrals or any help I can give you, is 603-657-5580. And I'd be happy to hear from anybody if there's anything I can do, refer, point, talk to you.
Sure.
I'm out there. New Futures is in Concord, and they're the advocacy group. Tomorrow night at the University of New Hampshire, rooms 354, 356, and 368, starting at 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. They're going to have it's called Let's Talk, and it's about drugs and alcohol, and it's a forum on drugs and alcohol, substance abuse issues, and what we need to do and look, in the future in terms of making sure there's treatment for people in the state.
Right.
And they're going to have food, and they're going to have child care services, and it sounds like a really good event. I'm going to be there, and I hope some other folks show up. Again, I was thinking about that one. If we had I've been watching Henry VIII, Tudors on Netflix.
Yeah.
And if the plague was going on out there, and somebody said, we're having a meeting, you get something to eat, and we're going to talk about how to deal with the plague so you don't get it, or you don't, what we're going to do.
Yeah.
You probably have to have the Verizon Center to get the people lined up that would want to learn about it.
Right.
So,
Right.
so tomorrow night, this is an epidemic proportion. I don't mean to minimize that.
Yeah.
And if you have kids, what could be better way to spend an evening than finding out and inputting some information from the folks that are really on the front lines of dealing with getting treatment for people that deserve it and need it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Dave, and thank you for the work that you do. I think it's great. And so you're going to be with us next week?
Yes, as far as I know.
All right, fantastic. So that's going to do it for this week's Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. Gary, get well. We love you. We miss you. And thanks, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Dave Fine. We'll see you next week, and we'll talk at you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.